The galaxy was burning. Whole star systems had fallen into silence as the war spread like a shadow across every world. What began as a small conflict between noble houses had become something far greater, something that pulled in mercenaries, fleets, and ancient powers that had long hidden in the dark. To the common people it was called the Barons' War, but those who lived through it knew there was nothing noble about it. Entire cities crumbled into dust, and the once mighty armies of the Barons were breaking apart. In the middle of this chaos, a human was dragged into a world he did not belong to. He had never wanted to be part of the war. He was an explorer, taken prisoner when his ship strayed too close to the contested zones. For days, he was held in a fortress built from black stone and glowing crystal. He expected nothing but harsh treatment from his alien captors, but fate had chosen him for something far stranger. The fortress belonged to a dying baron, one of the most feared rulers of his kind. The baron had ruled with a hand of iron, crushing rebellion and forcing weaker houses into submission. But the war had drained him. His armies were gone, his enemies closed in, and his body was failing. Even the advanced medicine of his species could not hold back the slow collapse of his strength. The fortress echoed with silence now, broken only by the whispers of servants and the sound of distant bombardments outside the walls. The human expected to be forgotten in some dungeon until death came. Instead, one night, armored guards came. For him. They dragged him through glowing halls, past walls etched with runes of power, and into a grand chamber. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of burning incense and old blood. On the throne sat the Baron himself, his once mighty body wrapped in layers of armor and cloth, his skin pale and marked with scars. His eyes burned with the last fire of a warrior who refused to fall quietly. The Baron studied the human for a long time. His gaze was not cruel, but heavy, as if he carried the weight of an entire dying world on his shoulders. Around the throne stood two figures, and when the human looked at them, his breath caught in his throat. They were not soldiers, nor servants. They were women, alien yet breathtakingly beautiful, their presence filling the chamber like living light. One had skin the color of deep sapphire, her features sharp, regal, and commanding. The other glowed with a soft violet tone, her eyes piercing and filled with something unspoken. Both wore armor that was more art than weapon, etched with lines that seemed alive, pulsing faintly as though connected to their very flesh. The Baron spoke, his voice deep and strained. He told the human that death was close, and with death came the end of his line. He had no heirs, no sons or daughters to carry his name, but he had two wives, bound to him by oath and blood. They were powerful, feared, and loyal beyond measure. Yet when he was gone, they would be left to the mercy of his enemies. His enemies would claim them as spoils, shatter their honor, and use their strength for their own wars. The human stood frozen, not knowing why he had been brought here, why the Baron was telling him these things. The chamber shook as distant. Weapons struck the outer walls, dust falling like ash. The Baron leaned forward, and for the first time his voice trembled, not with fear but with the weight of choice. He declared that his last command, his last act as ruler, was to give his wives to the human, not as spoils, not as slaves, but as something else, something no one in the galaxy could understand. He called it survival. The human's heart raced. He had seen war. He had seen death, but nothing prepared him for this moment. The eyes of the two alien women locked onto him, searching, judging, waiting. The Baron's breath grew weaker, but his voice remained strong as he said the words that would change everything. The human could hardly believe what he had just heard. The dying Baron's words echoed in his mind, heavy and unreal. To be given wives, alien wives of all things, was not something he could even process. He wanted to speak, to ask why him, but his throat felt tight. He had been nothing more than a prisoner, an outsider caught in someone else's war. And now he stood, at the center of something far greater. The Baron lifted a trembling hand. His armored fingers pointed toward the two alien women standing beside him. Their faces were calm, but their eyes told different stories. The sapphire-skinned woman's gaze was sharp, filled with pride and command. She seemed like someone who had never once bowed her head, not even to her enemies. The violet-skinned woman's eyes were softer but no less intense. There was sorrow in her expression, but also a strength that seemed to come from deep within. "You are human," the Baron said, his voice cracked and ragged. "Your kind is not bound by our laws, not yet. My enemies cannot claim you, cannot strip from you what I give. Take them. Protect them. In you lies the only chance they have to survive what comes after I fall." The human finally found his voice. "Why me? I am no warrior of your kind. I am no ruler. I am no one." The Baron gave a low laugh, bitter and hollow. "You are human. That is enough." The chamber grew silent again. The human did not understand, but he could feel the weight of those words. He had heard whispers before, even during his capture. The galaxy did not yet know humanity fully, but what little they knew carried fear. Humans had a strange reputation, fragile, short-lived, yet dangerous in ways no other race could explain. The Baron's breathing grew heavier. The incense smoke curled around him as if the very air knew death was close. He leaned back against his throne, his strength leaving him. "It is decided. My bloodline ends with me, but my wives will live, and they will live with you." The sapphire-skinned woman stepped forward, her armor glinting under the chamber's lights. She stood tall, her presence commanding even in silence. Her voice was firm, steady, and filled with authority. "If this is the Baron's will, then I shall obey. But know this, human, I do not follow easily. You must prove yourself worthy of the trust given here tonight." The violet-skinned woman's expression softened as she too stepped closer. Her voice carried a quiet strength, almost like music. "You are not what I expected, but if the Baron believes in you, then I will not turn away. I will walk this path, even if it leads into fire." The human's chest tightened. He was not ready for this, not ready to carry such a burden. Yet he saw the truth in their eyes. They were not weak. They were not helpless. They were warriors in their own right, and yet bound now to him by the Baron's final command. Outside the fortress, the sound of war grew louder. Explosions rumbled like distant thunder, shaking the walls. The Baron's guards shifted uneasily, their armor clanking in the stillness of the hall. Time was slipping away. The Baron raised his hand one final time, his voice breaking but strong, enough to cut through the chaos. "Swear it, human, swear to protect them. Swear it upon whatever honor your kind holds. This is my last command." The human's hands trembled, but he forced himself to stand tall. He had no crown, no throne, no armies, but he had his word, and in this moment it felt like the only thing that mattered. "I swear," he said. His voice was steady, louder than he expected. "I will protect them. As long as I live, no one will take them." The Baron's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. His eyes closed, and with a final breath, the ruler of the fortress fell silent forever. The silence in the chamber was heavy after the Baron's final breath. The incense still burned. The runes on the walls still glowed faintly. But the man who had ruled so many worlds was gone. The human stood frozen, unsure if he should grieve or fear what came next. He had sworn an oath to a dying ruler, and now that oath weighed on him like chains. The sapphire-skinned woman lowered her head for only a moment, a gesture of respect that seemed almost painful for someone so proud. Then she lifted her chin, again her eyes fierce. "The Baron is gone," she said. "The enemies will not wait. They will storm this fortress. We must leave." The violet-skinned woman touched the Baron's armored arm one last time before turning to the human. Her eyes glimmered with sorrow, but her voice was steady. "He trusted you. That means we trust you. But we must move now, or we will all be nothing more than trophies for those who come." The human swallowed hard. He had never led anyone in war. He had no weapon, no army, no plan. Yet the two women looked at him as though his word mattered. He nodded, forcing himself to focus. "Then we leave. Show me the way." A sudden blast shook the walls, sending cracks across the glowing runes. The guards at the chamber doors shouted, their voices sharp with alarm. Another explosion followed, closer this time, and a section of the fortress roof collapsed with a roar of falling stone. The war was no longer distant. It was here. The guards moved to form a shield around the human and the two women. Their armor gleamed with faint light, but their numbers were too few. The Baron's forces had been broken long ago, and only scraps of his loyal men remained. Still they held their blades high, determined to fight until the last breath. The sapphire-skinned woman took command without hesitation. Her voice cut through the noise like steel. "Form ranks. Push toward the eastern gate. That passage is still hidden. If we reach it, we can escape into the mountains." The violet-skinned woman placed a hand on the human's arm, guiding him through the chaos. Her touch was firm, protective. "Stay close to us. You swore to protect us. But tonight, we protect you as well." The human felt his chest tighten at her words. He was supposed to be their shield, yet here they were guiding him, pulling him forward through fire and ruin. He clenched his fists, anger rising. If he was to be their guardian, then he would not let them carry the burden alone. The fortress halls became a storm of battle. Enemy soldiers flooded in, armored beasts with glowing weapons and faces twisted with hunger for victory. The loyal guards fought fiercely, their cries echoing off the stone, but they were outnumbered. The air filled with the sharp clash of blades and the burning smell of alien plasma fire. The human stumbled as one of the enemies broke through the line and charged at him. He had no blade, no armor, only his bare hands. But instinct surged through him. He grabbed a fallen weapon from the ground, a jagged alien blade, and swung. The strike was clumsy, but it cut deep enough to send the enemy crashing to the floor. The sapphire-skinned woman's eyes widened for a fraction of a second as she saw him stand tall with the weapon in his hands. A faint smile curved across her, lips quick and fierce. "Perhaps you are not as unready as you think." The violet-skinned woman's voice was softer but full of fire. "Then fight beside us. Do not falter." The human gritted his teeth and nodded. The oath he had sworn in the throne room burned in his chest like fire. He would not let the Baron's trust die with him. He would not let these women be taken. Together they pushed through the halls, step by step, blade by blade, closer to the hidden passage. Behind them, the fortress fell, and the last of the Baron's loyal guards gave their lives to hold the enemy back. The war was now on their shoulders, and survival was the only crown left to claim. The fortress burned behind them as they reached the eastern passage. The air was thick with smoke and dust, but the sapphire-skinned woman's voice guided them, with sharp commands. Her confidence cut through the chaos like a blade, and the soldiers who still lived followed without question. The human kept his grip on the alien weapon he had claimed, his heart pounding with each step. The hidden passage was narrow, carved through stone and lit by glowing crystals that pulsed faintly. They rushed through it, their footsteps echoing, in the enclosed space. The violet-skinned woman stayed close to the human, her hand brushing against his arm as if to remind him he was not alone. The further they went, the more distant the sound of battle became, replaced by the low hum of the crystals. When they finally emerged into the cold night air, the sky above was alive with fire. Warships streaked across the stars, their weapons, burning trails of light. The mountains stretched before them, jagged and dark, their peaks hidden in swirling clouds. Behind them, the fortress collapsed with a roar. The once mighty stronghold of the Baron, now nothing more than ruin. The sapphire-skinned woman turned to face the survivors, her expression fierce. "The Baron is dead. His enemies will hunt us. Now, but we are not broken. We will not be taken. We move through the mountains. From there, we decide our path." The human felt the weight of her words. She spoke not only as a wife of the Baron, but as a leader in her own right. The soldiers looked to her for direction, and she gave it without hesitation. Yet when her eyes turned to him, he felt something shift. For a moment, her sharp gaze softened, as if she measured not just his strength, but his will. They began the climb into the mountains, the air growing colder with each step. The human's muscles ached, but he forced himself to keep up. He had sworn an oath, and he would not falter. The violet-skinned woman walked beside him, her movements graceful even on the rough path. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying only to him. Do not doubt yourself. The Baron saw something in you, and now we do as well. He shook his head slightly. I am not like you. I am not trained for this. She gave a faint smile, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. You are human, that is enough. The galaxy whispers of your kind. They say humans are stubborn beyond reason, that when all others break, you endure. Perhaps that is what he trusted. The words sank into him, warming him against the cold. He had never thought of his humanity as a weapon, but here, surrounded by fire and loss, it was the only shield he had. Suddenly a sound cut through the night, a low growl, deep and primal. The soldiers froze, weapons ready. From the shadows of the rocks, shapes began to emerge. Not enemy soldiers, but beasts. Their bodies were massive, covered in scales that shimmered faintly under the burning sky. Their eyes glowed with hunger, and their claws scraped against the stone. The sapphire-skinned woman stepped forward, her hand on her weapon. Mountain predators, she said calmly. They smell our fear. The human tightened his grip on his alien blade. His pulse quickened, but something inside him steadied. He looked at the beasts, then at the two women at his side. He would not run. Not tonight. The violet-skinned woman drew closer to him, her armor brushing against his shoulder. Stand with us, she whispered. If you falter, we all fall. The beasts circled, their growls rising into a chorus that shook the stones beneath their feet. The soldiers raised their weapons, fear flickering in their eyes. The human raised his blade, his voice low but firm. Then let them come. And when the first beast lunged from the shadows, he met it head on. The first beast crashed into him with terrifying force. Its claws raked against the alien blade he held, sparks flying as metal screeched against hardened scale. The human staggered back but did not fall. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But he planted his feet in the rocky ground and pushed back with all his strength. The beast snarled, its glowing eyes fixed on him, but he drove the blade upward with a sudden burst of will. The edge cut deep into the creature's jaw, and with a pained howl it stumbled away, blood hissing as it hit the cold stone. The soldiers shouted in surprise. They had expected him to break, to be crushed in an instant, but instead the human stood, chest heaving, his eyes burning with defiance. The sapphire-skinned woman watched him closely, her sharp gaze narrowing. There was something new in her expression, something like respect. Another beast lunged, this one larger and faster. Before the human could react, the violet-skinned woman moved with fluid grace. Her weapon struck like lightning, cutting across the beast's flank. She shouted at the human, her voice fierce. Focus! Do not fight the beast's strength, use its weight against it. Her words snapped something inside him into clarity. He ducked under the beast's swipe and rolled to the side, bringing his blade up into its exposed neck. The strike was not perfect, but it was enough. The creature roared, crashing to the ground in a violent heap. The sapphire-skinned woman charged into another, her movements fierce and precise. Her armor glowed faintly with each strike, her weapon flashing arcs of light. She fought like a storm, relentless and commanding. The human found himself drawn into her rhythm, his strikes clumsy but effective as he followed her lead. The beasts circled tighter, growling louder, but the group did not break. Soldiers rallied at the sight of their strange human ally holding his ground. Fear turned to fury, and their weapons rose higher, their cries shaking the mountain air. The predators had expected easy prey. Instead, they found themselves bleeding, falling one after another beneath steel and stubborn will. The final beast roared, its massive body towering over them all. It leapt, jaws wide enough to swallow a soldier whole. The human moved before he could think. He shoved one of the fallen soldiers aside, planting himself in the monster's path. His blade rose, both hands gripping tight. The impact nearly broke him, but he held on. The jagged weapon plunged deep into the beast's throat. Its momentum carried it forward, crashing into him and knocking him to the ground. Dust and blood filled the air. When the silence finally returned, the human gasped for breath beneath the heavy carcass. Strong hands pulled him free, and he looked up into violet eyes filled with relief. The violet-skinned woman helped him to his feet, her voice trembling but steady. "You fought like one of us." The sapphire-skinned woman stood nearby, her blade dripping with dark blood. She regarded him for a long moment before speaking, her tone sharp but no longer cold. Perhaps the Baron was not a fool after all. The soldiers began to gather themselves, dragging away the dead beasts and tending to the wounded. Their eyes kept turning to the human, whispers passing between them. He was not one of them, not a warrior of their kind, yet he had stood against the monsters and survived. That alone was enough to shift something in their hearts. The human felt his arms ache, his legs weak, but there was a strange fire inside him now. He had been afraid, but he had not run, and when the moment demanded it, he had fought. The violet-skinned woman touched his arm, her voice soft but firm. "You swore to protect us. Tonight you proved those words were not empty." The sapphire-skinned woman's eyes narrowed as if she were measuring him anew. Her lips curved into a small, fierce smile. "Human, you may yet earn the right to stand at our side." The human met their eyes, breathing hard, and for the first time since the oath he believed he could keep it. The mountains stretched endlessly before them. Jagged cliffs rose like teeth against the burning sky, and the wind howled through the narrow paths. The survivors moved carefully, their weapons always ready. They had escaped the fortress, defeated the beasts, but their true enemies were still hunting. Every shadow felt heavy. Every sound carried danger. The human walked between the two alien women. His body still ached from the fight, his arms heavy, but he forced himself to stay strong. The oath he had sworn weighed on him, but now it was no longer just words. He had stood beside them in battle. He had seen their strength and felt their trust. That made the burden something he was willing to carry. The violet-skinned woman moved with quiet grace. She walked close to him, her steps light even on the sharp rocks. Her eyes often scanned the horizon, but she spoke to him softly when the others could not hear. "You bleed like us," she said, noticing the cut across his forearm. "But you do not fall, that is rare." He gave a faint smile, though it was tired. "Where I come from, we do not stop just because it hurts. We keep moving until the end." Her gaze lingered on him, as though weighing his words against the stories she had heard of humans. Slowly she nodded. "That stubbornness will keep us alive." The sapphire-skinned woman led the group with a sharp eye. She was fierce, commanding, and unyielding. She spoke less to the human, but when her gaze met his, it was never dismissive now. She no longer looked at him as a burden. Instead, she looked at him as someone who might stand beside her, though she did not yet say it aloud. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder. Snowflakes began to drift through the air, glowing faintly in the strange light of the warship still burning above the clouds. The soldiers were weary, their steps slower, but none complained. They followed the women without question. Then came the sound, faint but sharp, metal against stone. The sapphire-skinned woman raised her hand and the group froze. Her voice was low, steady. "Scouts." The human's heart quickened. Enemy soldiers searching the mountains. If they were found now, they would be surrounded. The sapphire-skinned woman signaled for silence, then gestured toward a narrow cave hidden between two cliffs. The group slipped inside, moving carefully through the dark passage. The cave was cold and damp, but it offered shelter. The soldiers spread out, watching the entrance. The human sat near the wall, his blade still in his hand. He could hear voices, outside, speaking in harsh tones, their language sharp and cruel. The enemy was close. The violet-skinned woman crouched beside him, her voice no more than a whisper. "If they find us, we fight, but you must not let them capture you, do you understand?" He frowned, confused. "Why?" Her eyes met his, steady and serious. "Because you are human. They will want you alive. They will want to study you, and if they do, none of us will escape." The words sank into him like ice. He had not realized just how much weight his presence carried in this war. To these enemies, he was not just a prisoner or a stray. He was something more, something they feared or desired. The sapphire-skinned woman joined them, her blade ready. Her eyes gleamed in the faint light of the crystals within the cave. You swore to protect us, human, but understand this, we will also protect you. The Baron's command binds us as much as it binds you. If you fall, so do we. The human felt a strange warmth in his chest at her words. These women, alien as they were, no longer looked at him as an outsider. They spoke to him as though he were part of them, bound by something stronger than blood. Outside, the voices faded, the scouts moving on. The cave remained silent, but the tension did not leave. The human gripped his weapon tighter. He knew the war would not let them rest, for long. But for the first time he felt ready to face it, not alone but with them at his side. The group stayed hidden in the cave until the enemy voices faded completely into the night. The soldiers waited in silence, their weapons drawn, until even the echo of footsteps was gone. Only then did the sapphire-skinned woman lower her blade. Her sharp eyes studied the entrance for a long moment before she finally spoke. They are gone. For now. The human let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The air inside the cave was cold, but his chest burned with tension. He glanced at the violet-skinned woman who crouched beside him. Her gaze was steady, her hand still resting lightly on her weapon. Even in stillness, she radiated strength. But rest did not last. The sound of a distant horn rolled through the mountains like thunder. The soldiers stiffened. The sapphire-skinned woman's expression hardened. They are calling to each other. Scouts have found our trail. They will not stop now. The group had no choice but to move. They left the cave, climbing higher along the mountain paths. Snow crunched beneath their boots, and the night sky glowed faintly red from the warships that still burned above the clouds. The human kept his grip on his jagged alien blade, his body tense with every step. They did not make it far before the enemy arrived. Shadows moved along the cliffs. Figures, armored in dark steel, their weapons glowing faintly in the snow. The first arrow of light struck the ground near the soldiers, burning into the stone. Then came the charge. The sapphire-skinned woman raised her voice, commanding like a queen. Form ranks. Hold the line. The soldiers moved without hesitation, their blades rising in a wall of steel. The violet-skinned woman stood at the human's side, her eyes burning with calm fury. Stay close, she told him. Fight as you did against the beasts. Do not think, just act. The first clash was brutal. Enemy soldiers slammed into the line, their weapons cutting arcs of light through the air. Sparks and snow flew with every strike. The human found himself locked in combat with one of them, his alien blade clashing against theirs. The impact rattled his bones, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. He was weaker, slower, but he had something the enemy did not: stubborn will. When his blade slipped, the enemy lunged for his throat, but the violet-skinned woman was there, her strike flashing past him, cutting the soldier down before the blow could land. She didn't pause, didn't even look at him, but her words were sharp. Stand up, human, do not stop. He rose again, fury burning hotter than his fear. Another enemy came, and this time he ducked low, slamming his shoulder into them with all his weight. They staggered, and he drove his blade into the gap of their armor. Blood sprayed across the snow. He pulled the weapon free, chest heaving. The sapphire-skinned woman fought like fire itself. Every movement was precise, every strike deadly. She cut down enemies one after another, her sharp voice rallying the soldiers to hold the line. But, as fierce as she was, her eyes flicked toward the human again and again. She was measuring him, watching how he stood, how he fought, how he refused to fall. The battle raged on. Snow turned red beneath their boots, the cold mountain air filled with the heat of burning weapons. The human fought beside them, his strikes, clumsy but unyielding. Where skill failed, stubbornness carried him. And each time he rose again, the soldiers around him shouted louder, their courage ignited by his refusal to die. At last, the last of the enemy scouts fell, their bodies scattering across the snow. Silence returned, broken only by heavy breathing and the hiss of blood cooling in the frost. The soldiers looked to the sapphire-skinned woman, waiting for her command, but her gaze lingered on the human. "You did not break," she said simply. Her voice carried no softness, but her words were heavy with meaning. The violet-skinned woman stepped closer, her eyes warm as she looked at him. "You fight with us now. You are not a prisoner anymore. You are one of us." The human stood in the blood-stained snow, exhausted but alive. For the first time he felt it too. He was no longer an outsider. In battle, he had become part of them. The snowstorm grew stronger as they pushed deeper into the mountains. Wind howled through the cliffs, tearing at their cloaks and armor, covering the blood from battle with white layers of ice. The soldiers moved slower now, wounded and weary, but they followed the sapphire-skinned woman without hesitation. Her voice was sharp in the storm, giving clear orders, keeping them alive. The human stayed close to the violet-skinned woman who seemed to move with ease even in the biting cold. She glanced at him often, her eyes soft despite the storm. "Do not let the cold reach your bones," she warned. "Humans are not built for this. You must keep moving." He gave her a tired smile. "I'll keep moving until I fall. That's the only way I know." Her lips curved faintly at his words. "That is why you are still alive." The sapphire-skinned woman glanced back, her eyes narrowing as she caught the exchange. She said nothing, but her silence was heavy. When she finally spoke, her voice cut like ice. "Do not waste words. The enemy is close behind. They will use the storm to cover their advance." The human felt the tension between them, unspoken but sharp. The sapphire-skinned woman was proud, fierce, unwilling to show weakness. The violet-skinned woman was gentler, her strength quieter, but no less real. They were both wives of the Baron, bound by his last command to him now. Yet even in their loyalty, there was rivalry in how they looked at him, how they tested his resolve. As night fell, they found shelter beneath a jagged overhang of stone. The soldiers huddled together for warmth, while the two women stood watch with the human. The storm raged, but the cave held enough to shield them from the worst of it. The violet-skinned woman sat near him, her eyes catching the dim light of the glowing crystals she carried. "You fight without training, yet you stand where others would fall. Do you not fear death?" The human thought for a long moment before answering. "I fear it, but I fear failing my oath more. If I die, it is nothing, but if I let either of you be taken, then my word is broken, that I cannot accept." Her eyes softened, and her voice was almost a whisper. "You speak like a warrior of our kind, though you are not one." The sapphire-skinned woman approached, then her steps sharp against the stone, her gaze locked on him, fierce and unyielding. "Words are easy, human. Oaths are easy, but strength is what keeps us alive. You fight with stubbornness, yes, but stubbornness is not enough to face what comes. You must become more than what you are." The human met her gaze, refusing to lower his eyes. "Then teach me. If stubbornness is not enough, make me stronger." For a heartbeat silence filled the cave. Then, to his surprise, a faint smile curved her lips. It was not warm. It was fierce, dangerous, but it was approval. "Very well. If you would carry the weight of this oath, then you will train as one of us. You will learn to fight not with desperation, but with purpose." The violet-skinned woman's voice was calm but carried a hidden challenge. "And I will guide him too. Not only strength matters, patience, balance, and the will to endure matter as well." The sapphire-skinned woman shot her a sharp glance. "We shall see whose lessons he survives." The human listened to their words, his heart beating faster. He could feel the rivalry between them now, not just as widows of the Baron, but as warriors bound to him. Both were determined to shape him in their own way, to test him to see if he was truly worthy of the oath he had sworn. Outside, the storm howled louder, carrying with it the faint sound of horns again. The enemy was coming closer. The human tightened his grip on his blade, his resolve burning in his chest. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a man carrying the trust of two powerful women, and the weight of survival rested on his shoulders. The storm began to break by dawn. The snow eased, and the first light of morning painted the mountains in shades of silver and gray. But with the clearing skies came danger. Horns echoed again through the cliffs, closer this time, carried on, the cold wind. The enemy was hunting, and they were closing fast. The sapphire-skinned woman stood tall on the ridge, her sharp eyes scanning the valleys below. She pointed toward the horizon. They are coming from the east. We cannot outrun them. If we move now, we walk into their trap. The violet-skinned woman joined her, her voice calm but steady. Then we fight here. The rocks give us cover. If we fall back into the narrow pass, their numbers will mean nothing. The human listened as they spoke, his grip tightening on his blade. He could see the soldiers looking to both women, waiting for a decision. But their eyes also flicked toward him now, as if his presence mattered too. The thought made his chest tighten. He was no commander, no ruler, but somehow their survival felt tied to him. The sapphire-skinned woman gave her order. Form the line in the pass, no retreat, we hold here. The soldiers moved quickly, setting themselves in the narrow space between cliffs. Their weapons gleamed faintly under the pale light. The human took his place at the center, between the two alien women. The violet-skinned woman placed a hand on his arm. Stay close. Fight with us. Do not let them pull you away. He nodded, his heart pounding. I won't. The enemy came like a flood. Dark-armored soldiers poured into the pass, their weapons glowing with cruel light. The sound of their war cries shook the rocks, and their steps thundered like an avalanche. The clash was immediate. The sapphire-skinned woman met the first wave with the fury of a storm, her blade cutting arcs of light as she struck down one enemy after another. Her movements were sharp, precise, unrelenting. The violet-skinned woman fought beside the human, her strikes graceful, almost like a dance. She moved with him, guiding his steps, turning his clumsy swings into deadly strikes. The human fought, with everything he had. His arms burned, his body ached, but he refused to fall. Each time an enemy came at him, he met them head-on, his blade fueled by stubborn will. He had no training, no skill, but he had something else: endurance. Even when blows knocked him back, he rose again, his oath burning in his chest. At one point, an enemy soldier broke through the line, rushing toward him with a weapon raised high. The human braced for the strike, but before it could fall, the sapphire-skinned woman's blade cut the enemy down in a single motion. She shot him a fierce look. Do not hesitate, strike first or you will not live long enough to strike at all. The human gritted his teeth, nodding. Then teach me here, in battle. And he did. With every clash, every desperate strike, he grew faster, sharper. The violet-skinned woman's calm voice guided him when his focus wavered. The sapphire-skinned woman's fierce commands pushed him to fight harder than he thought possible. Between them, he became something new. Still human, still raw, but no longer helpless. The enemy fell in waves, their bodies filling the pass. The snow turned red beneath their boots, the air heavy with the smell of blood and smoke. The soldiers of the Baron shouted louder, their courage lifted by the sight of the human fighting at their center. At last, the enemy broke. The survivors fled back into the mountains, their horns calling retreat. The pass fell silent except for heavy breathing and the hiss of blood on snow. The sapphire-skinned woman stood tall, her blade still dripping. She looked at the human with narrowed eyes, but this time there was no doubt in her voice. You are no longer a prisoner. You are our shield. The violet-skinned woman's gaze was softer, filled with warmth. And our bond is sealed. You fight as one of us now. The human stood between them, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. He had survived again, but more than that, he had earned something he could not name. For the first time, he felt not only like a man who had sworn an oath, but like someone who could carry it to the very end. The mountain pass was quiet after the battle, but silence did not mean safety. The survivors gathered their strength, their faces weary and marked with blood. Snow fell again, covering the dead, but it could not hide the truth. This was only the beginning. The Baron's enemies would not stop until every trace of his line was erased. The sapphire-skinned woman stood at the edge of the pass, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. She spoke with the voice of command. They will return in greater numbers. We cannot hold here forever. We must choose, either flee deeper into the mountains or strike first before they recover. The violet-skinned woman turned to her, her tone calmer but no less certain. To strike first is to throw away lives. We are too few. We must endure, survive, and find allies. The human gives us a chance, if we are wise enough to take it. Both women looked at the human then, their gazes heavy. He felt the weight of their eyes like chains. He had been nothing more than a prisoner, but now he was the one they turned to. His oath had become more than words. It was shaping the path for them all. He stepped forward, gripping his blade though his arms ached. The Baron gave you to me, not as spoils, but as trust. I swore to protect you, and I will. But we cannot spend our lives only running. We must choose a place to stand, and when we do, I will fight with you until the end. The sapphire-skinned woman studied him, her pride unbroken, but her eyes softer than before. Spoken like a warrior. The violet-skinned woman's lips curved in a faint smile, her voice warm. Spoken like a leader. The soldiers bowed their heads slightly, murmuring agreement. In their eyes, the human was no longer an outsider. He was the shield the Baron had promised, the one who carried their last hope. But fate was not finished testing him. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, horns sounded again, louder, closer, relentless. The enemy had returned, their banners rising like black flames against the snow. This time they brought not just soldiers but war machines that glowed with cruel power. The human felt fear rise in his chest, but he forced it down. He looked at the two women at his side. They were strong, fierce, beautiful in ways he could not describe, but beneath all their power they were bound to him now. If he broke, they would fall. The sapphire-skinned woman raised her blade. Then we fight until none stand against us. The violet-skinned woman touched his arm, her voice steady. And if this is the end, we meet it together. The human tightened his grip on his weapon, his breath clouding in the cold air. He looked at them both, then at the soldiers behind them. No, this is not the end. Not while I still breathe. The enemy charged. The mountains shook with their advance. The sky lit with fire as weapons roared. And into that storm, the human led the charge. He was no longer the outsider dragged from a dungeon. He was no longer only a man bound by an oath. He was a shield, a leader, and a warrior forged in fire. Side by side with the sapphire-skinned woman's fierce strikes and the violet-skinned woman's graceful defense, he fought with a will that could not be broken. Each step forward was carved in blood, each strike burning with the weight of his promise. The battle raged until the snow was red, and the enemy broke against them like waves against stone. The soldiers shouted in triumph, raising their weapons high. The two alien wives stood with him, battered but unbroken, their eyes fixed on him with something deeper than respect. When silence returned, the sapphire-skinned woman spoke first, her voice low but fierce. You are ours now, human. Not because the Baron gave us, but because you earned it. The violet-skinned woman stepped closer, her gaze soft but unyielding. And we are yours. Not because of command, but because of choice. The human stood, between them, exhausted but alive. He had sworn an oath in a dying chamber, but here in the blood-stained snow he had fulfilled it. Whatever the galaxy thought of humans, whatever enemies still hunted, it did not matter. He had become more than a prisoner, more than a survivor. He had become theirs.